treasure, not a novel. Confidence is the currency, worth more than gold in this game of life. Let your story unfold.
Hey, you, yeah, you. Do you know your worth? Let me hear you shout. Let me feel that hurt. Hey, you, yeah, you. You were born to shine.
I want to welcome you to another episode of You're More Than Enough with my very special co-host, Miss Ebony, who is our resident expert on so many things. So today we're going to talk about something that's really near and dear to our heart, and we're going to talk about co-parenting. And it's kind of interesting because it plays perfectly because most of you know I do a lot of stuff in fatherhood and parenting, so I get into a lot of these discussions. So it's nice to have another voice and another point of view. So with no further ado, let's get right into this. So is it something you want to open with, or you just want to jump right into the questions?
We could jump right in. Listen, I think that the topic also came up because just in crossing paths with a lot of parents, and a lot of times when we think about co-parenting, we front, right? And we kind of eliminate the father or the male person. But I've been coming across a lot of men who are leading in the co-parenting realm, where they are the primary parent, and so I just thought, why not, let's have a conversation about that, and talk about like all of the implications. And I'm a firm believer that co-parenting doesn't have to be difficult, but there are a lot of people that would beg to differ. And so I just thought that you and I could kind of ping pong, off of one another with regards to that. And I think sometimes when we think about co-parenting, we think about separate households, right? But then there are a lot of married couples that will say things like, oh, I feel like I'm a single parent in this, or, and so I think that co-parenting is way broader than we give it credit for.
Well, I think that is a kind of a fishtail that, men have been, single dads have been around for a long time. They have single dads who have kind of led in co-parenting is been here forever, especially in our community. I think what happens is that the focus in our community is always on the dad who is not there.
Yes.
So we order single mom for political purposes because that's always how I can justify bad stuff happening in the neighborhood by saying, oh, it must be contributed to single moms. Let some people tell it, every negative social pathology that happens in this world comes from single moms. But like I've known a few. I was a single dad for a while. I had my oldest son before I got married, so I've been on that side of the track before when I was leading the co-parenting. So I know and I get it. But I think what people miss more than anything else is it's an individual thing. It's not every circumstance is different. And people like to take and put, like, they'll know one bad parent or one bad dad who's not co-parenting, and they'll just slap that on all, especially when it comes to African-American men, because that's typically who the label is associated with. And what I think is one of the biggest obstacles is the lack of resources. I think for single dads, the lack of resources, which is why I do what I do, is one of the biggest obstacles. And I like to hear your opinion on that, because we assume that every person knows how to be a mom and knows how to be a dad. That's like the natural assumption. But it's not. And you can't give what you don't have.
You
so
can't.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. No, I was going to say, and as you were talking, it took me back to like eons ago, like when you and I first met with Project Elect and the Fatherhood Initiative, right? And so we were in position to help new parents to learn a certain skill set in order to be effective parents, right? And so, and I think back to even when I became a parent, there was no handbook, right? There were no guidelines. It was kind of like you kind of just do it, and so, but being put in a position to educate young people and to help them, right, how to shake up or to change the trajectory of their path, given that they were now teen parents. And I thought one of the most beautiful things about that time was being able to see how you were able to corral around the young men. Because again, a lot of times the emphasis and connection to resources is always like put in the court or the lap of the woman.
But I also think examining what that actually means to be a co-parent. I think most people, the word is thrown around, but they don't understand. Co-parent means two people working together. you know, um, for the betterment of the child. Co-parenting means that you have two people trying to raise this young man or young woman. Co-parenting is not because he has a mom and a dad. Now, I want to make that abundantly clear because people think because someone has a mom and a dad, oh, we're co-parent. We're not. And I also want to say on both sides, I've had situations where the guy was doing a lot of work and situations where the young lady was doing a lot of work. In all fairness, it's more common for a single mom to be pulling the weight. So I will say that. However, I think the second barrier is not just lack of resources and a lot of times I find myself dealing with people who don't know who they are and they're trying to raise this child. They have no clue who they are. They have no foundation because they didn't exactly come from a strong example. Their example was not good. What you see on TV, Homer Simpson is the longest running dad on TV. That tells you about our society. Homer Simpson. So, it hasn't been a lot of good role models tasked to be responsible for another human being, and they don't know how. And I think for men, and I think pride gets in the way of a lot of times because they won't ask for help.
Right.
I think even if it was a library full of books, like it's funny because I'll get guys to join my fatherhood class, and we'll have these conversations, and one on the virtual class, rather than being on camera saying it, they send it to me in the chat. Or I'll get a bunch of stuff when the class is over. They'll email me certain things. It's almost like I'm embarrassed to know what I don't know.
And pride and ego kind of steer the ship, right? And so it's hard for anyone who already feels defeated to really ask for help, to allow any ounce of vulnerability to be exposed, because then it's like I'm naked, and people can use that against me, or people will constantly remind me that I needed help when I was like down on my luck. And so I think too, empowering individuals to be okay with that vulnerability, right? And it's like one thing I always say is like the only thing a person can tell me is no. So I'm gonna ask anyway, and then how do we shift or how do we pivot in that sentiment? But I think normalizing those conversations, and how earlier on we were taught that no question is a dumb question, but then on the flip side, people are clowning us or laughing at us for asking the dumb question, right? And so I think getting back to that and reminding people that if you have a question, 9 times out of 10, there are other people in this room, other people in this group that are sitting on the same question, but it takes bravery to speak up and to let it out, right? And so I'm real big on always commending individuals who ask the questions, thank you for that, or I'm pretty sure that helped another, and so like, again, get into the space of being able to normalize that, because we don't know what we don't know. And co-parenting can be very difficult, and especially if you have an individual who is putting the child's needs first, but then the other party is in an emotional space. So they haven't quite fallen into alignment with what the mission is, right? And so naturally, yes, that is going to take a little bit more work. But as long as you can kind of keep yourself in control and understand that you can't necessarily control the other individual, I find that the walk becomes a little bit more doable.
What I'm finding is, and I want to start to get into some solutions, is we are a society of labels. And most people have allowed the labels to dictate how they live out their lives, how they perform, so like I know guys, when they hear the word co-parent, they always go to the negative side. Like, man, they like some people associated with it, man, I just walked out on her, or they want to start to defend why they have, oh man, she this, she this, she this, she that. And that term is not meant to cause a war. It's not meant to have people debating whose fault it is. So I think that's a large part of the problem. Because right away they go to the defense mechanism. Oh yeah, well she did this or she did that, or what am I supposed to do? And that's not what the term is about. Or even trying to get people to understand that when you decided to have this child, no matter how you did it, 60 seconds, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever, that kid came into this world not because they wanted to. And now you have two human beings who are responsible for the child, and getting people to understand that that is the most important thing. The second thing, because I'm interested to hear what you have to say about it, is I think most people don't understand you model what a relationship looks like to your children. You do.
Mm-hmm.
So I deal with guys and females who are broken because they came from a situation where their parents' relationship was broken. And that was what they saw in a relationship. Now, there's exceptions to every rule. I want to make that abundantly clear. But a lot of people I deal with, their brokenness comes from things they saw from their mom or from their dad, or co-parenting homes and they didn't speak. Parents didn't speak. So now they think it's okay, to have this person and not speak. Or dad just, hey, pick the kid up, they did something, that was it. There was no real relationship being established there because that's where they were raised. So I think those are some of the other looming issues that impact that whole thing about co-parenting. So I would like to get your thoughts on that.
Well, I think being able to understand that not everybody was raised the same, like you mentioned. Right. And so we all come from different backgrounds. We all come from different experiences. And just because my experience doesn't land the way that yours does, it doesn't necessarily mean that my way is wrong, right? And so a lot of times when I'm working with families, I really try to get them to understand that it's not about the finger pointing as much as it's about what is best for their kid. So if dad is, and I'm just saying dad because you mentioned dad coming to pick up the kid, but we know that women do it too. But if dad is coming to pick the kid up and he feels like, oh, well, we're going to go out, grab a bite to eat, we're going to do an activity, and then I'm going to bring you back home. If he feels like that's the level of parenting that he's capable of, or he's doing a good enough job, does it mean that the woman now gets to say you're a poor dad or you're not doing da 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 da? But if in his mind, if he sincerely believes that that is enough, we don't get to dictate what he deems to be enough. We can share our opinions, but isn't that where a lot of the arguments kind of stem from? Because now I feel like you're trying to dictate to me how to show up. But what we know from experience is, like you said, it's about relationship, and the way that you show up will manifest itself later, because those kids get older. And at a certain point for a kid, you picking me up to get something to eat and doing an activity with me is not enough. And then I become of age and I say, I don't want to go. I don't want to do anything. I don't want to do that. You don't know anything about me, right? The kids will find their voices and being able to vocalize. And so the other parent doesn't necessarily have to get looped in or caught up in the constant reminders of what you should or shouldn't be doing. I'm a firm believer, Chris. I think that you should allow people to show up as their most authentic selves, and you'll see what they want to do versus what they have to do, right? Because that's so huge when it comes to co-parenting, and I know from experience, I don't want to put my kids in a situation where there's a resentment that I now have to spend time with you, or resentment that I have to switch up my calendar because your mom is saying I need to do X, Y, and Z, right? So no, like, you show up in a capacity that you see fit, and I'll do my part as a mother and you do your part as a father, but being able to eliminate the constant conflict, or the disagreements. It's one of those things where it's like, I can only model for my children from a mother's perspective or a mother's stance, right? Because I'm not a man. So if this is what you think fatherhood looks like or fatherhood should be, then I have no choice but to allow you to be great in that capacity. And I think when we can start talking about capacity, I think it will shift the narrative a little bit. That's just my opinion.
That's a lot to unpack there. So It is because it's interesting because, and I'll start with one of the earlier statements you made. That's nice when you say people shouldn't judge people, but man, this is the reality we live in. People are always comparing somebody to somebody else, and in good or bad. It's funny because my shameless plug, my latest book, Defeating Your Inner Critic, I talk about that because most of us, those opinions impact us. We don't admit it. Most of us, our biggest problem is because we argue with ourselves. Because Ebony said, I'm not a good dad, so now that's my fighting point. And most people, men and males and females, that's what we do. We compare. We what we think the standard is, we do, whether it's right or wrong. So I hear you when you say women, but they looking at the Cosbys thinking, yo, dad should be like that. Or they girlfriend got the girlfriend's child's dad is always there. He's forget that maybe he's making six figures and dude is not making six figures. Maybe dude is working two jobs and he's not. But you hear that. I hear it all the time when I'm talking, and I hear when I'm talking to what females. Females will say the same thing. But why they can't be like this, or why he can't be like that. The second part of allowing people to show up, I think, show up, but the expectation should be growth. I think you should never. I think part of the problem most people have with co-parenting is, even in marriages, is almost like soon you walk in the door, they start complaining. The running joke is, whether I walk in the door and you start right away, or you give me 20 minutes or an hour, the bill's still gonna be due. It don't change.
It's still gonna be
But I think that creates another paradigm shift because you get guys who feel attacked. So now I feel attacked. I'm with ego and pride. So now I'm taking it personal, and I don't know how to separate this from the child. I don't know how to.
So I want to play devil's advocate, right? With regards to that sentiment, like you said, the bill still has to get paid, right? And so, like I said earlier, my mindset is the only thing a person can tell me is no. So whether you say yes or no, it still has to get done. Right. But as the co-parent or a parent who should have shared responsibility, if I ask you or if I say something to you that's needed, not for me, but for the kid, and you say, I can't or I'm not, right, it still has to get done, whether you do it or not. And so then the conflict becomes, or the sentiment becomes, they don't need me for anything, right? Like they're going to make it happen either way. And so now I have this out. And that's why I said, it puts you in a position to see what a person wants to do versus what they have to do, right? And so I think that's just as important because it still has to get done.
But timing matters.
Timing matters.
There's a way you can say, hey, Ebony, how you doing today? How was your day? Whatever. Not soon you come in the door, this is what you have to do. Or why didn't you do that? Timing matters because you're more often than not, your approach dictates the response. It does. So I think I wasn't saying that he or she shouldn't pay it. What I'm saying is give the brother some time, and that was just one example. I think that kind of interferes when you get to co-parenting because in his mind, right or wrong, every time she sees me is about what I have to do, or she's reminding me about what I can't do. And I'm not making excuses. I'm saying these are the things that make co-parenting tough.
No, these are real things. And this comes up in the office a lot.
And from a male perspective, and a lot of females do this, they do compare. Well, Isabel so-and-so does this. Isabel so-and-so did this. Renee so-and-so, and they do. And I don't even know if they do it on purpose, but they do. So, and I think that weighs on the other individual, whether male or female is doing the comparison. I think that
and then it's
that creates
it's the self-criticism, the self-judgment, all of that ties in. But I also think too, we've been conditioned to make a lot of assumptions and to think for the other party, right? And so that's where effective communication comes in. You talked about timing. Timing definitely matters, the approach matters. But at the end of the day, the need still needs to be met. And so if we're co-parenting, minimally, we should be able to come up with some level of negotiation or some level of consideration, right? And I feel like a lot of times that's off the table. I did a group with a group of men a few years ago, and one of the guys, and this has always stood out to me because it's a real thing. He said, so we were talking about time and showing up for the kids, and I'm like, the kids don't care about the financial part, right? They just want to spend time with their other parent,
Yep.
the parent that's not at home, right? And so he was like, well, for me, I feel like if I can't show up bearing gifts because I'm in transition, then I stay away. And I'm like, but the kids don't care whether or not you come with gifts. You know what I mean? All they know is daddy's coming to see me. And he said to me, Chris, he said, I know it's messed up, but I feel like my mom did it. She raised us by herself. My dad didn't show up. And so I feel like their mom should be able to do it too. You know, and that's a real mindset or a way of being and thinking, you know.
There's two things there. The first thing is men are taught, most men are taught from adolescence that you're the provider. You know, and part of your manhood is based on how you provide. Even when men talk to each other, you know,
Yes.
that becomes like the unwritten thing. You know, we supposed to provide.
Yeah.
You know, if my wife make more money than me, that's a problem. You know, because I'm supposed to be the breadwinner. You know, my wife has a bigger title than me. For some men, that's a problem. You know,
Yeah.
my wife is paying for all this stuff. You know, for some men, that's a problem. You know, so
Yeah.
and it's ingrained in us at an early age. And part of it is kind of funny because a lot of that comes from outside our community. And I think we don't even realize a lot of that comes from, you know, you see the pictures and, you know, people who don't look like us doing all this great stuff. Hey, Jimmy, Merry Christmas. And he shows up with all this great stuff. And, you know, he got his other wife with him or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's just so, but we fall into that category. But I think the second part of it is you are a product of your environment, whether we like it or not, unless we subconsciously say, we're going to make a change. We're going to be different. You know, we're not going to allow our environment to take over. We fall into how we were raised because that's our norm. And norms are one of the most powerful things that we deal with because our norms make sense to us. It may not make sense to anybody else, but that's the norm. Love my dad to death. But one thing I had to realize when I got married was I had to do an analysis of, you know, he didn't really teach me a lot of stuff like do this, do this, do this. But how much did I learn from his behavior? You know,
Yes.
what did I learn from being exposed to that? What did I learn about relationships based on my mom's responses to stuff? You know, how she did not respond to stuff. You know, you begin to think about it, like, man, all that stuff comes into it, but the average person doesn't. The young man or man who made that statement, I agree with everything you said, but in his mind, it
makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. So this is where I think when we say show up, yeah, but now it has to become education. Now it has to be, you know, I need to grow in what fatherhood means to me. You know, I need to grow in what being a man means to me because a man means some men, you know, I know men who don't tell their kids they love them, you know, because they never went through that. You know, heck, they can't even tell their girlfriends or wives they love them. You know, one of the questions I ask a group of guys all the time is, when is your child too old for you to hug them? And you know, some people actually attach ages to that.
They do.
Like, you know,
men and women. Men and women.
See, funny because most women I talk to, man, they could be 80, they still gonna hug them. That's my baby. It's kind of funny. So that's it. But most guys think I'm gonna make them soft. And this is where the co-parenting becomes interesting because I think we don't know how to communicate effectively. And I think that is one of the major differences because we never talk about I'm getting off the subject, but when I sit down with couples, one of the questions I'll ask is, what's your definition of love? And almost 90% of the time I get two totally different definitions. And that's why you struggle. If you're saying I love you to death do you part, and I'm saying I love you to something better come along. You know, you're not even fighting for the same thing. So now if you move it over to parenting, you moved it over to parenting, it's the same thing because my mom was right, even though she may have raised me in the dungeon and punished me and made me do this stuff, you know, and your mom made you weak or soft. So I think that's still the dilemma that part of co-parenting that we have to work out because I don't think enough people sit down and have conversations. And I think most people are not mature enough to say, let me put my personal feelings aside for Ebony and let's have this conversation about our son or daughter. What's the best way to raise our child? So I think
Yes.
that causes a huge rift because, and then you go on pride and ego. It really gets complicated.
Yeah. And you know what, Chris? I think, like you said, it boils down to maturity, having those conversations. So I think when we work with families, and as we begin to like roll out, like, okay, this is a new change or a new shift, and now we're going to be co-parenting and we're in different places or what have you. I think one, having the conversation, but also being prepared to follow through, right? Because we can sit down and have a 4-hour conversation, and then the following week, nothing that we discussed is touched on, or there's no action behind the things that we thought we were putting in place. And so, naturally, yes, one party is feeling a little defeated or feeling a little disrespected or even dismissed. Like, why would we keep doing this if there's going to be no follow through? So I think when we think about being able to co-parent effectively, that follow through piece and leading with intentionality, like we can't get away from that, is so paramount in being able to have a successful co-parenting journey, right? I grew up in a family where we're like one big melting pot. My grandmother welcomed everybody, right? And if a relationship or something didn't work out, you're welcome to come. You know what I mean? There was never any like, oh no, keep those kids away or you won't be able. No, come on, come see your kids. You show up, I'm gonna create space for you to see your kids. And I feel like I have embraced that part of her personality. And so when I think about co-parenting, I think about the melting pot. I think about the more people to love on our babies, the better. But everybody doesn't think like
Oh
that,
no.
and so yeah, like that's huge. And because I'm like, invite everybody. You want to come, bring your kids, But a lot of people can't wrap their minds around that.
See, you think like I think, where it really took a whole village to raise a child. We believed in that. We believed in family was one of the most important things, and I pass it on to my kids now. That's they're adults. The most
Yes.
important thing. However, we're now seeing the remnant of single family homes. Um, get
Hmm.
in trouble for saying this. I think a lot of women mistake independence, you know, for being a lone ranger, and there's a difference. You can be
There's a
independent,
difference.
and do what you got to do, what's necessary, but you don't have to constantly prove it to people and be by yourself. But I think that's becoming more and more because well, I don't need him. I can do it by myself. Yeah, everybody needs somebody at some time. So I think that's kind of
Hmm.
contributed to it. I think you also had the factors where you get some guys who, they're on the same trip too. I'm gonna prove to her I don't need her. So the kid come out with the boat all to the right of the head and stuff all over the place. Because and I think we have that now because now my manhood is being tested because I can't take care of my kid. So I think what you said is true. And I see. I think, and this is crazy. So I think counseling needs to be aimed towards co-parent. I do. I think therapists need to get involved in some of these situations because you have two individuals who they hate and disdain for each other impacts the kid. Like I've had situations where mom talked about dad to the kid or dad talked about mom to, and it's terrible because now the kid is like,
Oh yeah,
yeah, I got the kid and I'm talking to the kid.
carrying
And the
this
kid
weight.
feel like I got to
Hmm.
choose. Do I choose dad or do I choose mom? Or one parent is worse than the other. So then co-parent is this whole mixed bag of nuts. And but what you said is long gone. I hate to say it because that whole community thing is over. You know, um, we don't have like families get together just or holidays. Whole families get together for holidays, and your kids are a little younger. I'm not younger, but younger than
Uh-huh.
mine. I don't know if you experienced, but I know when my kids were dating,
Yeah.
that was a real barrier. The difference from what our family was versus people that came in. They thought we were like the cops.
Hmm.
They thought we were weird. Because like I see the close yeah,
Yeah.
with you, what women look like, yo, how you that close with your mom and dad? You know, so there's a lot of factors I think that go into co-parenting. I think some
And you know what? Yeah, there are a lot of factors. I think back to like when I went through my divorce, right, Chris? I was never an individual that would say don't have my kids around that woman, right? Like if they were dating, I was never that. And I'll tell you why. Honestly, I felt like sometimes we get lost in what the other parent or the
Yeah.
other party is doing, which will definitely impact our ability to co-parent. But I had to get to a place, and actually it was the older woman that I had spoke to around the time I was going through my divorce, and she poured into me. And I love her to this day for it. Don't ask me her name because it was a random meetup, you know what I mean? But she poured into me so much. And so I never allowed myself to say those things, not to have my kids around a certain woman, right? Because I had to trust that if this chick is good enough for you to be with her, or I have to trust that she wouldn't do anything to harm our children because she's with you, right? And so I think that took a lot of stuff off of the table, because it's easy to say, oh, she's just mad because I moved on, right? And so now we're getting distracted from the goal of parenting. And I think, again, when we talk to families and we talk to individuals, it's important to really help them to hone in on what those distractions are, what those distractions look like. Are we operating from a place of emotion or fact, right? And it has to be facts over emotions, and so we don't know, but we have to condition ourselves to trust that they wouldn't put our kids
I
in
share
harm's way. And I think that helps navigate the space a little differently.
when I'm dealing with
I know that was
co-parents or males and females. I typically tell them, I think it's a waiting period before you just put your kid around a bunch of people. I think there should be a waiting period. I do agree with you, but I think every time you go out with somebody for the first date should not be an introduction to your kids.
I agree.
You shouldn't be, this is Uncle Bob, Uncle Pete, Uncle Bob, this is Aunt Betty. So I think there's kind of some stipulations to that, but I do agree, if and I hate to say it like this, if the person is vetted, they spend some time together. I just think it sends the wrong signal if I'm introducing if I'm got my son with me and I'm introducing to a woman every month.
That's different. That's different. So that wasn't our situation.
No, I know you weren't sounding the same.
Yeah.
What kind of example am I setting for my son? So I think, or daughter. So
but
I think
that's a them issue, right? I can't control that, because even if the opposite parent, if I'm controlling, and this is how we help families deal with conflict resolution. If I am trying to dictate or control everybody that you're around, right? You're going to keep doing it. If the goal is to get me upset, right? But when you notice or realize or come to accept that I'm not bothered by the way that you're moving, right? The hope is that you will go inward and begin to do the work that you need to do. But if I'm constantly arguing with you about, well, who's there and who's this and who's that, why wouldn't you keep doing it? Because now you're getting attention, And so I think, again, when we focus on the kid, it's like, okay, but we should be able to have mature adult conversations in order to reach some common ground, right?
And I agree I agree to a certain extent. I think because I was in that situation before. I don't, and I think she was one who was more worried about it than I was. But I would express. I didn't make a big deal out of it. I would just say, hey, just please be careful who you have my son around. I never made it wasn't telling her, don't see this, don't do that. And I would explain my concerns. Now it's up to her to deal with it. It's up to her to say, to choose not to. I wasn't like running bodyguard looking around the corner like, yo, who you? I wasn't, So, but I think, especially in this day and age, with the amount of crazy people we have, you should have a little concern. Now, to you, control is one thing that I do agree with. I think too many times we use kids to control, to try to control the situation. So I do agree. But I think, again, it goes back to teaching people how to communicate effectively. How can I not allow my emotions for you getting away of me trying to take care of my child? How can I not allow our past history, no matter how traumatic it was or crazy it was, to interfere with the relationship with my child? And I think a lot of times that's what you see. Then it's compounded by, because typically somebody goes out and starts another family. So now it's worse. And now it's like, hey, especially if you do better with that person than you did with the person before. You know,
But that also goes into um, what you're willing to do and what you want to do, right? Like what you have to do. And so it is that like that. I think that that speaks to character, right? And so if your character allows you to go on and start this new family and you totally forget about the kids that you already had, that speaks to your character, right? And so when I'm working with families, I talk a lot about that. Like you can't control that, and it's preference for that individual. And I get that it hurts and it stings and you carry this weight for your kid, but a lot of times parents project what they're feeling onto the kid, right?
oh, I agree. I
Sometimes
agree 200%.
like, I don't care, but I think it's so important for parents to understand that. And again, it speaks to character because as a parent, I'm gonna go back to Bush, right? Like no kid, no child left behind. Like none of my babies are gonna be left behind. I don't care. You know what I mean? But it's how you model that, how you bring
But you
this
also,
new
but you
to
also have to
your world, incorporate.
but you also have to recognize that you're different. And I had to come to understand that a lot of people that I was dealing with, I was different. I was built differently. We can look at the
Mhm.
same thing and see it two different ways. Um, I give you a perfect
Yeah.
example. A lot of guys, to me, don't fight hard enough to keep the relationship alive with their child when obstacles occur. So I do agree. If you make it hard and difficult, well, so what? That's your son, that's your daughter. So I do agree. Some people think, hey, I just that you said earlier, she'll be all right. Well, mom was all right. They use a reference point. And then characters and one of them things that you have to define because people interpret characters being different. You know,
Yeah.
I was talking to a group of college kids and they told me good and bad is all relevant. But they were serious. It's all relevant. And I'm like, what do you mean by that? One person like, well, if I don't get caught, it's not bad. It's like kind of like if a
Yeah.
tree falls apart. So I think you're dealing with all those attitudes. And when you're talking about emotions, because emotions become involved because you said I can't see my child, so now you're telling me what to do. You're in control. And as a man, that's driving me crazy. You got all the power. You control everything. Now because maybe I'm not mentally mature. Maybe my
Mhm.
history has not taught me how to respond. So I respond how I know, and that's being an idiot. And what do we do? It's no different when a lot of women do this. When they get mad, they stop talking. And you'll say, hey, what's wrong? Nothing. And you know
Well,
something's wrong.
clearly.
And you just,
Well,
yeah, by the attitude, nothing. And then 3 days later, they'll tell you. And that happens. Guys tell me this all the time. And I think people don't do that on purpose. It's just built in. And I think that happens a lot of times in co-parenting. That I'm not really going to say what I feel. It's going to build up. You know,
yeah, and I want to pick your brain for a quick second, right?
don't get me in trouble.
I know I know, like, so again, when I went through my divorce, there were certain things we had to do, right? Like, so co-parenting was one of the things that came as a part of filing and moving forward, right? Like, it was mandatory that we go through these co-parenting classes. I more recently, I would say within the last 5 years or so, I've been educating young men on the front end, and I say young men because again, young men feel like the system isn't built for them, right? There's this huge misconception, but there's also a lot of truth to it, right? That the court systems only work in favor of the women. But I've been talking to a lot of young men and encouraging them, especially when they are becoming parents, right? To make sure that they put something in place through the courts where they have joint custody of
Mhm.
their children so that way they have equal rights, because I think for our young men they equate custody with child support and they're two separate things. But to making sure that their name is on their kid's birth certificate early on. But I think it would be, and just this is me putting on my prevention hat, it would be so beneficial if when a young couple comes into the doctor's office and they're like, we're expecting, or a young lady comes in and says, I'm pregnant, that there's something in place that says co-parenting classes should be required, right?
Well,
What
I
do
think
you think
parenting class as
about
a whole, yeah, I agree. Yeah, I agree.
period, right? But I was going to say, so what do you think about young men who feel like the system is not set up for them, um, finding alternative ways to fight for their children and to be involved, right? Because a lot of times they feel so defeated, like she won't let me see my daughter, she won't let me see my son, and the girl feels like she has all of the power, and now she's using these kids as pawns, but the young man is feeling like, I don't want to have to deal with her energy, her attitude, so I'm gonna fall back.
Well, one, the system is not set up for them, and that's just the reality of it, because the system is set up for the state just don't want to, the government don't want to pay for this kid, so they want to get child support. That's why they say pay $25 a week, which means nothing, and they don't say spend time with the kid. They just say pay your child support. I think the second part of it is a lot of times when a guy walks in the room, he's already the bad guy. The assumption is that this dude is not paying child support or whatever for whatever reason. And I go through that back to my situation. I had to come. I went to them like you said. And I had it come down on my paycheck. I volunteered, had it coming out of my paycheck. My company was late a couple of times. They drugged me. They drugged me down and had me labeled as a deadbeat. I'm like, wait a minute. This is coming. Go back and check the history here. Then they called the company. I ain't getting an apology. I didn't get all my bag kind of thing. We made a mistake. I was like, yo.
Yeah.
And he was on my insurance. I still had him on my insurance and everything. So I was good. But to them, they didn't want, they didn't want to pay anything. Then what happens is I deal with guys who, if the young woman is collecting welfare and they find out, you got to pay that back. You got to pay it back. The guy has to pay that back. Whether he knew about it or not, it goes into his child support. So I can see where they feel like it's kind of stacked against me. I've been down there with guys, and the girl show up with the Rebecca Sunnybrook Farm ponytails all the way down here, the dress all the way down below her knees and everything. Yeah, like I'm the victim. And a lot of times people believe it because the assumption is that guys are not taking care of their kids or bad or deadbeat dads. I was at a conference one, and this lady angered me because we were talking to a group of men, and the guy asked a legitimate question. He said, "Look, hey, I want to get custody of my kid. I want to just be able to see my kid." And lady didn't ask him any questions. You probably not paying for it. That's why the mom is telling you can't see him and everything, and you're a deadbeat dad and all that stuff. Nah, come to find out the dude was overpaying child support. He just didn't have visitation rights. To your point, he wasn't, I don't want to say, he wasn't wise enough to bring that up when he was sitting there in that hearing. So I get how they feel. I do get how they feel. However, I do think you need to fight to see your kid. I think sometimes it is an uphill battle. Sometimes it's hard, and there's extenuating circumstances. Like if she moves out of state or something like that, it gets tricky. And
So
also,
that's why I encourage them to have visitation documented, to have that joint custody, because I think too, and I tell young ladies this too, what they don't understand is when there's nothing on paper, if he decides to come and get the baby or the kid for the weekend and he says, I'm going to North Kakalaki, whatever, there's nothing you can do, Missy, until he decides to bring that kid back, and vice versa, and so it is important that individuals are taught how to advocate for themselves, how to fight for the rights that they have to their children, and again, I think that people make co-parenting difficult because the emotions are kind of steering the ship versus really looking at, what's most important.
Because whoever controls your emotions control you. And I don't think people don't realize that. And I'll back up to you made a point about guys making sure their name is on the birth certificate. If you're not there, you don't have no control over that. If she has a child, I know somebody who out of spite, she didn't want to put the dad's name on, so she put his name down. And they came after him later on for child support. He went in that. She just out of spite gave his name to pull in the birth certificate. So that kind of, it makes it interesting and difficult. But I do think, one, you're right. I think there needs to be some kind of counseling for co-parent. How you make people go, I don't know what they should do. Maybe when they go down there
Mhm.
for child support and it's like a volatile situation, maybe that's part of the thing. Say, yo, you're going to face work, but you guys need to, attend counseling, because I think that drama sometimes drives people to not see their kids, because I'm pissed off at you. I'm so pissed off at what the mom did that I don't see my kid, and I go start another family. And I'm doing the things with this kid that I never done with my kid, and it happens. I deal with kids who dad got a family right around the corner, and they are traumatized, because they see dad getting in the car with them doing all this great stuff, and they try to make it meet. So I think, and there again, I think if people would learn how to sit down and have dialogue and put their emotions aside, things like that wouldn't occur, because they'd be trying to work things out. Okay, me and you not getting along, but guess what? I'm gonna do the best I can with my son or with my daughter. I think it becomes a war at times, to your point, where there's no counselor. But then again, I want to go back to what I said. If you don't know who you are, how can how do you handle that? Because if I don't know who I am.
Well, I think that, okay, so now, like you said earlier, you said I might get in trouble for saying this. I might get in trouble for saying this. I feel like if you are an individual and you have multiple children, at a certain point, you can't ride the wave of I don't know what to do, or I don't know who I am, or I don't know how. Right? At a certain point, you have to go inward and say, I am planting all of these seeds and I'm not doing anything to nurture any of these seeds that I have planted. At a certain point, you know, those seeds are growing, getting older, you're growing and getting older. And it can't be once life slows down for you that now you want to circle back to the seeds and say woulda, coulda, shoulda, because now you are at risk of them saying, yeah, you're right, you woulda, coulda, shoulda, and I don't owe you anything, and so I think that sometimes when it comes to the mindset of, like at a certain point, you have to hold yourself accountable. You have to take responsibility for your own choices, and understanding too that people don't have to always offer you grace, right? And so that's something that I talk about when I'm providing counseling for people working through their co-parenting stuff. But it's like you have a very short window to nurture these seeds. And at a certain point, you know what I mean? Like, they're like, we have all the nutrients that we need. Like, there's nothing else that you can do for me at this point, And then as an adult, that's something you have to now accept.
So then let's close on this note. So what do you think about the opposite? You have people like Cam Newton, Nick Cannon. We have kids in the double digits. They don't live with them, but they're rich. So they can buy houses, they can send support, and they can send their kids to the finest schools, but they don't get to spend time with them.
They don't get to
So what's your response to that? Because they came under fire, I guess about a couple months ago, because this lady was letting them have it. She was explaining to them that, being a dad is just not about monetary contributions. So what
and that's something he's gonna have to contend with, because I agree, like I don't think it's cute, one, but it is what it is. That's a situation, but you're one individual. And so, yes, how can you stretch yourself across multiple states, multiple households, you know what I mean? And think that, as long as I'm giving, that the kids will be good. There's going to be a few kids out of that bunch that are going to call him on that, and they're going to call him out on that, and they're going to say, I don't care about your money, right? What I needed from you was your presence. What I needed from you was your guidance to show me and to, help me navigate this thing called life, So I think that, again, when we get to a point of these seeds now growing, they find their own voices and they will speak to it. I think that it takes a lot of effort to be able to say, all right, I want to get all of my children together. And who knows, I would like to assume that he does that from time to time, but from time to time isn't always enough, right? But it can be done. And so I really think, going back to what we started out with, it really depends upon equipped with the finances to be able to provide for these children, but somebody's missing out.
All right. So another great conversation, another great show. Maybe it won't take us as long to get the next one, but you heard it, guys. We talked about co-parenting here. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of buzz around this. It's a great conversation, but I also want to encourage people, if you're co-parenting, that you listen to this in its entirety. And it's like fish. You eat the meat, spit out the bones. There's going to be something here that's going to be applicable to you and your relationship, because the bottom line is your kids. So any closing thoughts you would like to say before we close out, Emily?
I'll just reiterate the sentiment that co-parenting does not have to be difficult, right? It takes a lot of intentionality. It takes a lot of, putting yourself to the side and putting the kids first. And if individuals stay focused on the needs of the youth and growing and developing the human that they could possibly be, I think that this world will be a much better place.
Thank you. Yeah, another great episode. You were more than enough. Until the next time, see you guys later. Peace.
We built for the hustle, let that passion show. Titled you a more, yeah, that's the motto, words of wisdom.